This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Now, when you look at this feedback form, okay, by just looking at it, you can understand that I've divided this into, let's say, two columns, two grid columns, and in each column, I have loaded this this text boxes. Now, when you look at the last text area field and the submit button, okay, this is spanning across two columns, this text area. Okay, and the submit button is also spanning across two columns. Let us see how to define that. So when you look at the form tags, let's say here I've given div, right? So let's say it as a paragraph, I'm displaying, let's say, the label, and just below the label I'm displaying the text box. Okay, fine. So then I put a div for styling it, right? And I have a container, and within the container I place the form, right? Okay, then when you look at the text area and the submit button, I have, let's say, styled it with a class name full width, right? So in the full width, I've specified the column spanning property. So here I've given the full width, grid column 1 to 3. That is, okay, when you can be considered as the first grid line, and the one that separates these two can be considered as the second grid line, and finally the third grid line. Now here I have said 1 by 3. That means that is going to occupy all the two columns, and I've set this the property, the spanning property, for two paragraphs, that is for the text area and for the submit button. Okay, fine. And when you look at the other styling elements, so box sizing, even the font family I've set, and the width I've set it to 600 pixels. Okay, and margin left auto and margin right auto will automatically display the form in the center of the screen. Okay, margin top and then padding, and then I've given a box shadow, okay, to highlight the outline for the container. So within the container, I am placing all this form. So I've given, let's say, for the heading, margin bottom. Okay, then text area. Okay, I've given the outline as when it is focus. That is when you move the mouse pointer. Okay, I am setting this property. When you place your mouse pointer inside the text area, okay, it will be highlighted with a gold color border. That is text area on focus. That is when the control receives the focus, the styling will be applied. Okay, then for the button, so when you move the mouse point in the hover property, set a background color, right? Form, I've set a background color. Display grid, I've set, and I've split it up into two different columns, and a grid gap I've specified 20 pixel. Okay, and the form label, okay, I've given a display block, and then the font size. Okay, margin I've set it to 0. And then for the full width, I'm applying it only for text area and the submit button, right? So I've given a background color, light gray background for the button. When you move the mouse pointer over the button, I'm going to change it to the gold color, right? This is another way of styling the form, right? So all you need to do is, when you want any control to span across multiple columns, you specify 1 by 3. So it is going to occupy the, let's say, both the columns. Clear? So when you look at it, this text fields, text boxes, 4 text boxes are occupying just a single column, and these two controls are occupying 2 columns. Okay, right now. So for the form container, you should always set the max width. Otherwise, it will occupy the full width of the browser window. And for the text boxes also, I've given the same styling. The moment you keep the mouse pointer inside the text box, you will get the highlighted border. The focus will be activated only when you keep the mouse pointer inside the control. That is when it receives the focus. So for the form label, why I have given the display as block? Otherwise, what will happen is both the label and the text box will be displayed on the next to each other. Now, what I want is I want only the label on, let's say, the first cell on the cell, and below that I want the text box. So that's why I've given display. A display block for the label. All these form controls like label, text boxes, these are inline elements. So when you don't want them to, let's say, to be placed adjacently, you need to, let's say, display the property, set the property as block. So always the form should be placed inside a container, because here you are specifying the maximum width and all the properties. Now suppose in the body, when I have a different articles and different section, so this should not affect the other HTML elements. So when you place it inside a container, it will be applicable only for the child elements of the container. So that is why you need to place all the form, the entire form within a container. So here I have created an ordinary button, not a submit button, right? When you, if it is submit button, the moment you click, it will send it to the server. So if it is an ordinary button, when I want to submit all the details to the server, I can, let's say, write a JavaScript code for the click event of the button to submit the details to the server. Okay, over. We'll go to the next form. Okay, here let's say I'm creating two columns, but when you look at the template column property, I want to make the first column bigger, okay, twice the width of the second column, and I want the second column to be smaller. Okay, so for the first one, I've given 2FR, meaning two fractions, and then 1FR. So the space available in the browser window will be, let's say, divided into equal 3 parts, and the first 2 parts will be reserved for the first column, and the remaining space will be reserved for the second column, right? Okay, so here I want to keep this upload button, okay, and for this I want to reserve a very small area for the second column. So that is why I've done 2FR and then 1FR, right? So here, let's say for the first one, I will, let's say, given the class as input file wrapper, and then here I've given the maximum width, padding, background, everything. Okay. 3 pixel, and all the other properties are, let's say, similar to the previous one. Button and then hover, focus. So for the input file wrapper, only for the upload button, I have set the, let's say, set it to the second column. That is the, so 2 by 3, and so grid rows, okay, it will be 1 by 2. And for all the other elements, it will go into the first column, 1 by 2. I have set it for the paragraph tag. So everything will occupy the first column except this upload button. Clear? Okay, right now. So the grid gives you the flexibility to, let's say, to divide the screen however you like. So it's not always necessary that you need to divide the space equally. So in the scenarios like this, you can make one column smaller and the other column bigger. Right now. You can share your assignment HTML files in the WhatsApp group. I'll download and check everything. Yes, your course will be completed after you finish your exams. So I don't know whether it is online or offline. You check with your college people. So in the button over here, I'll set it to, let's say, gray. On mouse over, what you can do is on hover, you can set it to a dark color and you can change the text color to white. Maybe you can set it to dark blue and you can change the text color to white. So for the paragraph, I've specified that it should always occupy the first column, and all this, let's say this label and text box, I've wrapped within the paragraph tab. So automatically they'll occupy only the first column in the grid. Over. With this, your syllabus is completed, and now we can start revising the topics, right? So today let's just go through all the, let's say, overview of all the topics we have learned, and let's say go home and prepare for the exam. Tomorrow, 1 hour before the exam, I'll answer all your questions. So you can discuss all your doubts with me, right? No, there are no marks for assignments. It is just that if you do assignment, you will become thorough with the subject. It doesn't carry any marks. Okay, let us start with HTML. Okay, so we have discussed, let's say, what is internet and what is a website and what is a web page. And I know all you people will be clear with this terminologies, right? So a website is a collection of web pages, and a web page can contain text, images, videos, and all other, let's say, audio or digital assets. Okay, let's say from a website, you can also even download a document, an MS Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF. Fine. So a web page can contain any of these elements. So we know about the static and dynamic web pages. Static web using HTML and CSS, you can create only static web pages. To create a dynamic web page, you need a server-side program like a PHP and then a database. Okay, fine. So HTML, we know the expansion is hypertext markup language. So it is used for describing the structure of a web page. Okay, and when I say markup, it says the whole HTML page is created using a set of markup tags. Okay, the tag describes the content, what content goes into that location, and a tag will also have attributes, right? So we know the basic HTML tags. I mean HTML and then the head, okay, the title, etc. So these are the basic HTML tags. I hope you don't have any doubts in this, right? Now, when you consider the main building blocks or the important tags, you have the headings, paragraphs, then line break, horizontal ruler, images, hyperlinks, then you have buttons, list, I mean non-breaking spaces, etc. So these are the basic building blocks of HTML. So whenever you specify the text content in a web page, you will be using any one of these elements. You can, let's say, for a heading tag, it is whenever you are describing any section or article, it is a must. And then paragraph, line break, okay, then images, list, and then spaces. So when I say, I mean non-empty tags, they'll have an opening tag and a closing tag, right? So HTML here is the container. HTML tag, you can call it as a container tag, which contains all the elements in the web page. When I say all the elements, it includes your style sheet, your JavaScript code, and then the content on the web page. Fine. Then, so when you say HTML element, everything that goes between the tag is an element. So when I say paragraph element, it includes let's say the paragraph tag plus the content the paragraph tag is displayed. Then nested element. So the nested element will contain other HTML elements within them. So the HTML tag, that is a container which contains all the elements in the web page. So the head tag contains your title and then the style sheet specification. So the body tag contains all the text content and then the media content like images, videos, etc. Then some of the tags will not have the closing tag. For example, the break, line break. So they are called as empty elements or empty tag. Okay. So when you consider the important HTML tags, you have tables, forms, list, hyperlinks, headings, paragraph. Okay. So for HTML5, you need to start with a doc type. It tells the word. So simply when you say doc type HTML, the browser understands that it is a HTML5 web page. Then you have the 6 levels of heading tags. So the heading tags are block elements, heading and paragraph. Okay. Then you can set the alignment for the heading. So if you want it to be aligned at the center or aligned to the right, you can specify it with a align attribute. So when you consider the text formatting tags, you have the bold, italic, underline, then subscript, horizontal ruler, etc. So for an anchor tag is a very important tag because when you want to create a hyperlink from one page to another page, you need to use the anchor tag. Href attribute. Href stands for hyperlink reference. You specify the HTML file to which you want to create the link and then the hyperlink text and then the closing tag. Then image tag. In the SRC, in the source, you specify the name of the image and the alternative text with the alt attribute. That is, for some reason, if the browser is not able to display the image, it will display the alternative text. Okay. So any doubts you have in this? Come on, I want you to reply. Do you have any doubts in this topics we have covered till now?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Next, let's say we'll start with a style sheet. So style sheet is used for defining the presentational aspects of a web page. So the HTML defines the structure of the web page. Structure in the sense, where exactly the text should go, where the image should be placed, where the link should be placed, and all this. So you basically define the structure. CSS is concerned with the appearance. So when you display a heading tag in HTML, what should be the color of the heading? What should be the font size? What should be the font? And how it should be aligned? All this you define using CSS. And JavaScript is not included in your syllabus. It is concerned with the behavior. So what I mean by behavior, when you click on a button, what happens? When I want to validate the form elements, let's say you know how to create the different form elements, how to create checkbox, radio button. Now suppose assume that I'm trying to submit a page without filling up the text field or without making any selection in the radio button. So using JavaScript, I can check whether everything is filled up properly, and I can tell the user, please fill up the form, then only you can submit. Okay, the JavaScript is concerned about the behavior of your web page. So what happens when you click on a button? What happens when you click on a hyperlink? What happens when you, now suppose let's say when you want to accepting a age from the user, let's say you want that to be let's say the age between 18 and 55. When the user tries to enter 60, you can display a message in the JavaScript saying that please fill up within this range. Okay, anyway, that is not in your syllabus, you need not bother about it. So let's your cascading style sheets. So why we call it as cascading? I can make, let's say, create a consistent look and feel for all the pages in my website using the style rules by placing the style sheet in a separate style sheet file. So you can say the style cascades to all the pages in the website. Okay. So how does the CSS work? When you load, let's say, load a HTML page, when you send a request to a HTML page to the web server, the web server will, let's say, return the HTML page. So first, your browser will parse the HTML and load the CSS rule, and then create the DOM tree. DOM stands for document object model, and then display the entire web page according to the style specified in the external style sheet. So when you consider the advantage of CSS, the main advantage is by controlling the content in one CSS file, I can control the appearance of thousands of HTML pages. So you can create animation, you can create advanced components. Okay, then you can let's say offline support also. That is not an HTML file, they haven't provided it yet. In the future versions they'll provide. Okay, and CSS helps you to have the same look and feel across different hardware devices. Now the version we are using is CSS 3. Okay, so the pages with CSS will load faster and maintenance will be very easy, and compared to styling the HTML elements directly, okay, this will be more attractive, multiple device compatibility, and it follows all the standards. Then, so you have 3 different types of styles: CSS, inline, internal, or external. So in the inline style, you specify the CSS rule with the element itself directly with a style attribute. So this is not recommended at all. Why? The problem is when I have 10 paragraph tags in my HTML page, I need to type the same thing 10 times. So this is not recommended. And when I want to make any changes to that, I need to make the changes in all the 10 paragraph tags. Then you have embedded CSS, where you specify all your style attribute, style sheet specification within the style tag. Okay, so this is a far better approach than the inline style, but even the external style sheet is recommended because any style rule you specify in a style tag is applicable only for that particular HTML page. Fine. So when I want to define a generic style sheet file and I want the style sheet to be applied to all the pages in my website, it has to be defined externally in a separate file, and the HTML should be linked to that CSS with a link tag. So that is what we say external style sheet. So you write the CSS rules in a separate file with extension CSS and link it to your HTML pages with a link tag. So if I need to make any changes in the style sheet rules, I don't have to open the HTML files at all. I can just make the changes in the style sheet file, and the changes will be reflected in all the HTML pages, since all the HTML pages are linked to this style sheet. Now, for example, in this, the header, I've given the color as white, the body background color green. Tomorrow I decide to have the light blue as the background. So if I have 100 HTML pages linked to the sheet, I just have to make the change in this style sheet file, and all the 100 pages will be updated, right? So the style sheet controls the design of all the pages linked to it. Okay, so when you consider the CSS rule, you have the selector and then the declaration. So the style sheet rule consists of two parts, the selector and then the declaration. Selector can be any of your HTML element like body, H1, H2, paragraph, okay, list. It can be any HTML tag. Then the declaration consists of two parts, that is a property and the value path. So the property you specify and then you can specify the values the property should take. And I can separate the different property value paths with a semicolon, right? Fine. So I can have the selector and then the declaration. Okay, declaration will be in the form of property and value separated by a colon. Okay, fine. Property value separator, declaration end. Right. Fine. So CSS rules. Right, property name, value. So I can define multiple properties for a single element, a single HTML element. I can, let's say, specify all these properties within the opening and closing curly braces. So when you consider the commonly used text properties, because I mean, nearly 40% of the HTML content will be text. So you need to be familiar with all the text properties. You have the background color, text color, font family, size, text alignment, and then the margin. So when you consider the selectors, so you can specify the HTML element directly, or let's say you can go for the universal selector which selects all the elements in the web page. So you can give the ID selector or the class selector. Now when you say class selector, see the class selector can be specified for a single element or a general class selector. Now if I don't specify any particular HTML element, okay, when I specify a class, that class can be applied to any of the elements. For example, here in this, I've just given dot red and I've given the style sheet specification. So wherever I want this to be applied, I can use the class is equal to red, let's say H2 paragraph. But if I say P dot red, I can apply it only for the paragraph, the element I selected, right? Fine. So you can say, let's say the parent and the contextual selector, you have the parent element and the child element, and they must be separated by a space. The style sheet rule will be applied for the child element if it is contained within the parent element. Then you have the ID. ID start with a hash. Okay, fine. And let's say ID can be applied only to a single element in a web page. The class can be, the rules can be applied repeatedly. Okay. So when you say the very specific, you have inline styling and then IDs, classes, and the most general, that is when you want to select all the elements, you have the universal selector. So so apart from the text properties, you have color and then border, padding, okay, text transform to convert the text to uppercase. For example, when I typed a paragraph in lowercase and I want it to be displayed in uppercase, I can use a text transform property, text transform uppercase. So automatically the lowercase will be converted to uppercase. Then when you consider the spacing, you have, let's say, the margin and then the padding. Margin defines the outer spacing. That is when I have two paragraphs in my web page. So how far the paragraph should be placed, what space should be reserved between the two paragraphs, that is defined by your what? your margin. Now when you say padding, within, let's say add a border. Within that border, what should be the space between the text and the edges of the border? That is specified with padding. Clear? Fine. Then you have various unit of measurements. When you're specifying a margin or a font size, you can use this pixels or points or EM. Okay, you can choose any unit of measurement you're comfortable with. Fine. Then so HTML. So when you want to display some information in a list. Okay, so the examples I can give you is, let's say you're designing a website and you're selling some products. You want to specify all the products in a particular category in a list format. You can make use of the HTML list. You have three types of lists: ordered list, unordered list, and definition list. So for unordered list, you'll have bullets for all the list items. For ordered list, you'll be having numbers, and you can style the numbers in different ways. Okay, you can have the number with a leading zero, or let's say instead of numeric digits, you can let's say display, okay, what ASCII letters. Or you can have Roman numerals, alphabets, lowercase alphabets, uppercase alphabets, then lowercase Roman numerals, uppercase. You have lot of choices available for the ordered list. Okay, for the unordered list, you can choose three types of bullets. Okay, that is a disc-shaped bullets, which is the default. Square. Fine. So this is an unordered list and then the ordered list. So you know how to create a UL stands for unordered list. Okay, LI stands for list item, right? And then it defines a list item to specify the types of bullets you want. List style type, you can say disc, circle, square. We use none. That is, you don't want the list to be let's say styled at all. That is when you want to use that list as a navigational list, you can set it to none, right? Then you can have, let's say, square markers or circular markers. And you can also apply a particular color for the list marker. Okay, then ordered list, you have OL. OL stands for ordered list, and then list item. So you can, let's say, apply whatever type of numbering you want: decimal, leading zero, Roman, upper Roman, etc. Greek alphabets also you can say, uppercase alphabets or lowercase alphabets. Then definition list. So here what you do is you give, let's say, a description of the item in the second line. First line you specify the item. Okay. Then we discussed about block and inline elements. So what do you mean by block and inline elements? The block element will occupy the entire width of the container. The inline element will occupy only the space that is really required for display. Now when you consider the paragraph, heading tags, okay, these are block elements, and inline elements are, the examples can be images, okay, then your anchor tag, okay, all your formatting tags like bold, italic, these are inline elements. When so as I explained, when you use any paragraph tag, okay, so it will occupy the entire width of the web page. So the block elements will break the flow. That is, when I say I'm displaying something with paragraph, I display a line. The moment I close the paragraph tag and use the next paragraph, it will automatically skip to the next line. So that is why we call it as breaking the flow. Whereas inline elements, well, they work by going with the flow. I can display 3 hyperlink tags in a single line because the display is inline for the hyperlink tag. Fine. Okay, now by default for the inline elements, I cannot specify the width. And for the block elements, I can specify the width. Now there is one more property called as inline block. Okay, it is just similar to the inline element, but I can set the width. Okay, so you can group any of the HTML elements within the div and span containers. But div is a block element and span is an inline element. So div stands for division. Like div as such doesn't make any changes to your child elements. So unless you specify the styling property with CSS, the div on its own doesn't do anything. Right? Span and div. Okay, so you can use the float property of the CSS to place the elements in any position you like. Okay, for example, you know img image is a inline element. I've displayed an image. Next to that image, I want to place a text block. So you can say float left for the image and the text block. They'll appear one next to the another. So when you consider the, let's say you're displaying some content, for example, using paragraph, right? So for the paragraph, I can specify a margin, I can specify a border, and I can also specify a padding. Now when I say margin is 10 pixel, so it will add a margin of 10 pixel at the top, bottom, right, and left. Then I say define a border of size, let's say 3 pixel. After applying the margin, the border will be applied. Let's say 3 pixel border will be applied. Now when I want to specify some spacing between the border and the content, I can add padding. So padding, border and margin can be specified for all the 4 sides together, or individually also you can specify. Let's say I can make the top margin 0. Okay, bottom margin 10 pixel. And the left and right, I can set any value I want. Fine. So when you apply a border for an element, see in CSS, there are lots of types of borders available. So you have the dotted border, dashed, and then solid. That is what is used very frequently. Then when you want it, the border to be double line, you can say double, outset. Okay, it will have, let's say, a small drop shadow. Okay, inset, then ridge, etc. So we have discussed all these slides and these examples. Now when you want to make the border rounded, so normally when you say border, it will display, let's say, what are solid corners. Now I want the corners to be rounded. You can specify the radius property. When you say 60 pixel, so it will be curved by 60 pixel. So the radius can be applied for all the borders equally, or each and every edge you can specify a different radius. So you can create lots of interesting shapes by varying the radius for all the 4 margins. So when I say border radius 50%, it will convert it to a circle. Then we have, let's say, discussed box shadow. So you can give the horizontal offset, vertical offset, blur radius, spread. That is how far the shadow should spread, and then the color. Color can be specified by RGBA. Fine, you can create lot of interesting effects with the box shadow property. And today for the form also we have seen how to apply a let's say box shadow by putting it inside a container and specifying the box shadow for the container. Then we have discussed about HTML tables, right? So the table will be having rows and columns. When you are adding the content to the table, you're considering only the rows. So you think of the rows. So what goes into the first row? The first row, first column, what goes? And what is the next row? You think only in terms of rows, not in terms of columns. You think of columns and rows only in CSS grid, right? In the table, you don't think of columns at all. So you have the table tag. TR stands for table row. TD stands for table data. Okay. Then you can specify the row span and column span for the table. You can specify the spacing between the table cells and also the padding. So as you know, the padding defines the space between the table, the container edges and the content. Then you have the T head to specify the table header, T body to specify the data, what goes into the body, and then T footer to specify a footer for the table. And having a header and footer is optional. It is not compulsory that you should add a header and footer for all the tables. You can skip the header or footer if you like. So as I told you before, the tables are made up of rows. Okay, you don't think in terms of columns. Okay, fine. So here is the example of a table with a header row. Okay, header row, you give the title for each column and then the footer row and then the table body. So to demarcate the table body, header and the footer, you can apply different background colors for this table header, table body and table footer. Fine. So when you want to style the table, you can select any of these elements, table elements. So when you want to style the table data, you can use TD, table, TH, etc. So when you want to specify different background colors, alternate for alternative rows, you know this nth child even and nth child odd. So we have discussed all these examples. Okay. Then, so let's say we have just seen how Are you people able to hear now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you look at the HTML head elements, so in the HTML head, you can specify the title for your web page. You can specify the style sheet rules. You can write the JavaScript code, script tag, and then the link. That is when you want to link to an external style sheet, you can give the link and then the meta tag to describe about the web page and base. So these are the 6 tags that can be given within the HTML header. Okay, now we saw how to add a video into a web page and how to add the audio. So the file format supported are MP4, WebM, and then OGG for the videos. And for the audio, you have MP3, OGG, and WAV, right? Okay, then we saw how to position an element relative to another element in CSS. Then we discussed about the different semantic elements like header, navigation, article. So the how to specify a header for a web page, right? And how to add the navigational links within the header. Then articles and different sections within the article, footer, and then how to, let's say, set the footer. All that we have discussed, right? And then the different contents, then semantic elements. Okay, so Google Fonts we have seen, right? How to download and use Google Fonts. So the commonly used Google Fonts are Roberto, Open Sans, and these are the fonts. Okay, then we have seen how to display a web page. Then finally we discussed about forms. Forms make you can make your pages interactive using forms, and forms are generally used to collect information from the people who visit your website. Let's say you've designed a website for selling your products, then you can collect feedback from your users. Then you can ask the users to fill up a feedback form, and then you can ask them for suggestions also, how comfortable they are using your website and what are all the changes they would like to be made, okay, to make it more easier for them. So to collect all this information, you need to create forms in HTML. So that is what we have been discussing in the past 2-3 classes. Now a form will have different form elements. Fine. So the form element can be a text box, an email field, or a password field, right? It can be a date, time, everything. Okay. Now when you look at the Google search, and when you're searching something in the Google, so what do? You open the Google and then you type the keyword. The Google display text box. Type the keyword inside the text box and Google will search for all the web related to that keyword. Google display. So here again, Google is accepting your input from a form only, right? So you have all the different types of form control. You have submit button, radio button, checkbox, drop down list, then group of option buttons, field set, then color, date, etc. So These are the most commonly used input form controls. Then text box, a normal text box where I can type any content I like. And then the password field where the contents you type will be hidden. It will not be displayed. Then email to accept the emails. Then, so these are newly added in HTML5, email and number. And the number to accept only the numeric values. Now when you're accepting the age from the user, right? So it has to be purely numeric. Okay, the number is how many years of experience do you have? So it should be 3 years, 4. It should be purely numeric. And then checkbox and radio button. That is when you want to give a set of options to the user and you want the user to select, you can use the checkbox or radio button. Checkbox allows multiple selection, but radio button allows only a single selection. And you can create a push button and then the color input, file, then image, etc. Okay, so simple registration form. You can have the name and then the email address. Right now, when you go to some of the websites, so they'll ask you, you log in with Google or log in with Facebook. So you enter your email ID and password. So immediately you're authenticated. Then field set is used to group the related elements. Okay, so these are the some of the forms, okay, which are designed with a field set. Then you have, let's say, input type is equal to text. Creates a one-line text input control. Type is equal to password, creates a password control. Type is equal to email, creates a text box to accept email. In case you enter an invalid email, that is you skip this. If I just write Uma without giving this at, it will tell you please enter a proper email address. So Uma at Yahoo, gmail.com. It will verify that the email address is proper. Then you have the text area where I can enter multiple lines of input. Like when you are accepting the comments from the website visitor, or let's say you want to accept an address. So the user has to enter 4 or 5 lines of input. For that, text area is used. Then you have, okay, text area. Then you have the number control where you can specify the minimum, maximum, and then the step value also. Then the date control. Date control is a very versatile control, right? You can accept the date, you can accept the date and time, right? Then you can accept the week, you can accept the month, etc. Then the checkbox control. Then radio button control, then the drop down list control, right? Okay, fine. So these are all the topics we have discussed in this 14 days. Okay, I've just briefly gone through everything. Now what I want you is to do is go and revise all this today. And in case you have any doubts, I'll clear all your doubts tomorrow before you start writing the exams, right? Right? Okay. So any questions do you have right now? Do you have any questions now? Okay, so we'll wind up with this today. So tomorrow we'll meet, right? So all the best for your exams. Okay, tomorrow 6 to 7 we'll be having the doubt session where you can ask all the questions. I'll be just answering your questions, right? Okay, bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.